how do you handle managers and co-work? How do you handle um, uh, dealing with coworkers who may have questions, may be resentful, may be sidetracked by a behavior that they don't quite understand?
So I think the upfront training is really important
Yeah.
in understanding autism as a culture and as a disability, understanding the sensory processing difficulties that most of us have, and the impact that they have on us, understanding our need to regulate our bodies and our space, which is what that video was about. It was a regulation thing. So that they have at least a basic understanding that this is a very different way of interacting in the world, and knowing that it's important to take a step back and not just jump to a conclusion. And then also knowing that it's okay to interact with the autistic employee or coworker and ask a question and say, hey, I notice you're watching videos while you work. Does that help you work? And so not just keep it all inside.
Yeah, so an affirmative question
Yeah.
rather than a challenging one.
Yes. Yeah.
That's neat.
Yes. We one of the things that I train is always say things in the positive rather than the negative. Yeah.
Yeah, out of curiosity rather than judgment. Yeah. Mary.
Okay, so, at Microsoft, we have this great autism hiring program, and when employees are hired through that program, they are automatically set up with the support system that they need. So there's education for the manager, for the teams, there's job coaches, so that support is built into the program, and they're set up very well for success when they start. The challenging thing for me in benefits is all the employees that have been hired into Microsoft that did not get hired in through that program. And what's great, though, what's really great is, the word is definitely getting out that Microsoft is, a diverse and inclusive company, and we have this autism hiring program. And what's really encouraging is that we have so many employees coming forward now to disclose their autism and to ask for the support that they need. Why that is challenging is because oftentimes when they are coming forward, it's because things aren't going well. And so perhaps performance is suffering. And, we've seen it plenty of times where if the team or the manager does not know about an employee's autism, then they don't have the full picture. And it can be difficult to interpret certain behaviors or even understand what that employee needs from a support perspective. So, we have partnered with Sarah, and Sarah does a great job of coming in and doing sensitivity training for our team. So we've seen this be very successful. And, as soon as you provide that education, it's just like what Sarah was saying, it's, then everything is understandable, and people really, truly do want to help the employees. They really do. So we've seen a lot of turnarounds happen with those sensitivity trainings, and I think it's a really great way to kind of catch that situation and turn it around pretty quickly.
So you're doing, just to clarify, you're doing a sensitivity training, I hate to use a pejorative term here, but as an intervention after the fact, after there's been an issue, as well as obviously preemptively. Is that correct?
Yeah. Not nearly as many as we do for the incoming, but yes, if there is a problem or if an autistic employee just asks for it because they feel misunderstood, yes. Fortunately, because I have a full-time job, there's not that many of them, but yes. And I live like 3 miles from here, so it's pretty easy.
And how do you frame that out? If it, if it is in response to something, how do you frame it out in a neutral way so that nobody feels finger pointing?
The employee has asked for it,
Mm-hmm.
and the employee is there.
Uh-huh.
And so they are the ones who are saying, I'd like you all to learn more about me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you give them agency, the agency to take ownership over that, which is empowering in and of itself.
Yeah.
And shows a heck of a lot of respect for your employee.
Yeah, and there's nothing about the training that's calling out anyone on bad behavior or anything. Yeah.
Great. Jose, do you have something to add?
From an accommodations perspective, everything really starts very early on when we're bringing the candidates in. We've had candidates that prefer to do what we would call a walking interview. Okay, from a sensory perspective, that's much more easy, and I've noticed that some people really open up when they're walking. Okay, so we give people that option if they want to go into a fairly open space like the cafeteria when it's empty. Okay, we have a courtyard. Okay, or we can go to a regular, more confined space to have a conversation about whatever we need to talk about. Other things that I fully agree with you, the video part is a very prevalent one. Okay, and we've seen that some of our colleagues, when they want to take a sensory break, they'll watch their preferred video. Okay, maybe they go to YouTube and they have a collection of things that they enjoy seeing, and that allows for that level of emotional regulation that will allow them to come back, taking a little break. But you're right. Some people might be passing behind the person, and they're looking at the favorite Japanese animation. There's a lot of affinity with that, and somebody may not interpret that correctly, right? Maybe they see that, and somebody asked one of our colleagues, "What happens if the vice president of the group is passing by and watching a video?" And I think that the response is from my perspective is, other people go out for a walk, go out for a cigarette. What happens if the vice president passes by and you're drinking water in the water cooler, right? So I think that we need to normalize some of this behavior, some of these things, because that's what helps people to be productive. Yeah.
Yeah, terrific. Jose, we're going back to you. You've got the mic. So, and you've mentioned some, but let's go on. Out of the box accommodations solutions that you've come up with that people might not have heard about that you'd like to share.
I think that one of the biggest areas, and I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet here. Okay, so we have some things that are related, for the most part, to job coaching. To your point, being one of those big benefit areas, right? We have communication and culture adaptation. We have cases in which our employees, for example, may send an email to the manager, and the manager does not reply within an hour, and the next one goes out with an exclamation mark and a return receipt. That doesn't get you the best relationship with your manager when you're just starting your job. Okay, so there might be other cases in which a manager, is going to maybe frown upon that, but not make a big deal, right? We may have situations in which an employee basically comes in and opens up a room, and there's some people meeting, and they're having a meeting, right? Well, there's a space situation here that you need. So these things need to be somewhat coached upon. Okay, that's part of, again, the communication and adaptation within the culture of a team. We talk a lot about company culture. The reality is that we have team culture. We're very tribal, okay? And every team has their own protocol and how they do things. I can tell you, for example, one story in our training, when we talk about training, how do you train employees to interact with their peers and so on? In one group, in our development organization, we have a long table where there's developers on one side, and the other one, they are wearing their earphones, they are listening to music while coding, and the way that is set up that way so that people can get up and ask somebody else a question. It's a very collaborative type of environment. I kid you not, you move 30 feet away and there's another set of offices where we have half-height cubicles in which if you want to talk to somebody else, you send a meeting request. You look at their calendar in Outlook, you have to check when they're available. Seriously, I mean, these teams are right next to each other. Right? They do different type of work. Try to preempt that in a training, okay? And you're not going to be able to cover every situation, right? So going back to your question, to your point on the training being the single best instrument, we provide training for our colleagues in the spectrum, but also we do the yin-yang thing and provide the training also for the managers and the teams as well. One more point is the teamwork adaptation. Sometimes people are not integrating really well into a team. So we look at those factors, and again, it goes back to job coaching again. Yeah.
Yes, Sarah.
So I memorized your schedule. Okay, so out of the box accommodations, to me, these are not out of the box, but I almost never see people do them. So, dimming the lights in meeting rooms. I don't know, just always dim the lights in meeting rooms. Even if you don't have an autistic employee, just do it. Other things, if you have an open office situation, the autistic employee could possibly sit near a window, so they're enjoying natural light along with the horror lights, as I like to call them. They may, for me, when I go to a restaurant, I always need to sit in a corner near a wall. That helps to dampen some of the noise in the room, right? So I can't sit in the middle. So just be cognizant of that. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. It's a little embarrassing to us, right? Like if I was in a wheelchair, I wouldn't want you being like, oh, let me push you over here, right? That's not okay. So same thing, don't be like, oh, let's go sit in the corner. Just go do that kind of thing when you go out with your autistic coworkers. Just go find a corner seat and say, hey, would you like to sit here? Other things, when you plan office events, plan for some accessible events. We often think about accessibility in physical ways, but think about them in autism accessibility ways also. Don't always go to a ball game or a noisy bar or restaurant. Think about some quieter activities as well, maybe a museum, an art gallery, a park, something like that.
Oh, great points. And back to the always sit in a corner. I mean, you can't assume that every autistic would want to sit in a corner. People are different, right? So
Yeah.
would you? Would,
You're right. No,
no,
some of
wouldn't
them
you
might
want to
not
ask?
want
Wouldn't
to.
you want to say, where should we
Where
sit?
where should we sit? So one thing I will say about sensory processing disorder is many autistic people, especially younger ones, are not in touch with their sensory processing disorder. And so they do not know how affected they are or are not. And so some of you can maybe make observations about how they are interacting in noisy or bright environments. Do they become more quiet? Do they get irritable? Do they get tired? And maybe make those observations, especially if you're parents. Are there any parents here? Okay, so maybe make those observations yourself and have question and answers with I mean, wouldn't just go to them, hey, you have sensory processing disorder, but you can start asking questions about it. I myself, until I learned about autism at the age of 41, did not realize that the reason I was a raving witch was that I had sensory processing disorder. And as soon as I started removing myself and protecting myself from sensory assaults, I became a nice person.
Wow.
More or less.
Great.
But
Okay.
you're right. We are all different.
So I've got a question for all of you. Mary, you go first with this
Okay.
if you like. How do you know if an accommodation is proving effective?
It is absolutely an interactive process. So, we are going to be staying in touch with the employee, with the employee's manager, with the job coach, with the doctor if the doctor has provided accommodation requests. So whoever is involved with the care of that employee, we're going to be staying in touch with them periodically to see how they're doing and to see if the accommodations that are in place are working. And I will tell you that it is a moving target sometimes. I mean, sometimes we nail it right off the bat. Other times we're shifting and adjusting and trying new things. And that's just the nature of the game. And but we do stay in touch with them because we want to make sure that they are being supported the best way that we can. And we are adjusting if we need to. So.
And do you go back and visit at regular intervals, or is it, kind of on a continual ad hoc basis?
I would say it is very much dependent upon the situation.
Okay.
If you have an employee that's really struggling and you know that things are just not good, I'll check in a lot more frequently. I might check in weekly with them just to see how things are going. For other employees where it's just, they just need a job coach just to provide a little bit of education around how they can better work with their team, work with their manager, handle priorities. That one I might check in with every month. So
Okay.
it really is dependent upon the person and the situation and how they're doing when they come to me.
Thank you.
I agree with Mary that the employee is the best source of how is the accommodation working. Observation is also your friend, as I mentioned before. Absenteeism, frustration tolerance levels, um, not finishing work, things like that would also be something to look for, or heightened anxiety levels, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we check with people, and when we ask how things are going, sometimes our colleagues in the spectrum cannot put the finger on things. So it does require, in some cases, kind of checking in, with people. And we've had situations in which, at the very beginning, we said, "Well, this person is doing well, is integrated, and let's just wait for them to give us a call." And some people, again, don't have the ability to come out. Part of the executive function skill issue of asking for help, okay, and they may start bottling things, right? So as a good practice, we said, let's go in and have what we call a quick well-being check-in, no more than 15 minutes, right? And well, see how people are doing. Right? If they have, of course, some situation that they want to volunteer, they come to us on an ad hoc basis. There's always somebody around, can help with these things. And this whole thing that I was telling you about, the 15-minute call or visit, is something that we have established in one location at the moment, right? It's something that we're testing and see how it works. It's really wonderful because some colleagues are telling us that's too often, okay? And some people say, can we increase it a little bit, right? So again, it's a very personal situation, but to your point, we're waiting for that cue from the employee also to tell us what is comfortable for them.
Okay, thank you. Um, any other points anyone want to bring up on any of the things we discussed before we open it up to the audience? Okay, audience, your turn. I'm going to be the mic runner. Do me a favor. I really like to hear who people are and where they're from. So just say your name, say what organization you're from before you ask your question. I'm going to give you the mic to ask your question. And Jose, I leave it to you to pass around the mic.
All right.
I know you, Pat. It helps to have friends.
Thank you, Lori. Hi, I'm Pat Inslee. I'm with Lincoln Financial in Philadelphia. I have actually two questions. One is that we don't have a program yet. We're hoping to start one up, and that's why I'm here. Um, some of the jobs we're considering are jobs that require occasional or more than occasional longer hours than just an 8 to 5 day. And sometimes we wouldn't know until later in the day whether we need people to extend their day. So I'm curious if that comes up. I can imagine it does, and how you accommodate it. First, that's the first question. And the second question is, have either of you, or either SAP or Microsoft, created a low sensory room that people can go to if needed?
Okay, so for the second question, the sensory room, we have a lot of meeting rooms. Yes, we have the possibility of people going out and taking a break. One of the things that I see happening a lot is that people go out for walks. Okay, so not necessarily going to one location and let's say turning off the light. But for example, you go to New Town Square, you go to Palo Alto, we have a room that is multi-purpose room. People that may want to meditate, people that may need a quiet moment, right? That's available for anybody. But again, the other thing that I see is some of the colleagues through the window going out for a nice walk, and that helps with the sensory part. Related to the number of hours, um, I don't think that we have experienced that. I mean, it's fairly normal, I guess, in organizations like ours, that you may have a long day, right? And you're working on a project and it's going to be extended. And that is something, of course, that is explained to people. Look, we're in a crunch right now. We're going to stretch. But then things are going to kind of go back to normal, right? You can take some vacation. Maybe you want to take some personal time off afterwards and so on. It's really, at least in our experience, something that we just communicate. Look, we're in a crunch here, and are you open to staying longer? Yeah.
So I would say for some autistic people, maybe many autistic people, if we're doing something that we like, that we're interested in, working long hours is no problem, right? So I stay at work for many hours, or I work at home for many hours often. I have two jobs, right? So I work a lot. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that as long as you do what Jose says, let them know that that could be a thing. And I'll let Mary talk about Microsoft, but what I have observed around here is that there are a lot of small individual areas where a person can go and sit by themselves, like little blocked off areas, which is nice.
Yeah, so we have Brian Collins here today as well from Microsoft. He's from our real estate and facilities. And, you know, at Microsoft, we have a number of campuses now that have moved to the open office environments, which can be very, very challenging for a number of the neurodiverse employees. It's not just autistic employees, it's a number of other employees. So with these campuses now being built so that they're an open office environment, our real estate and facilities team has gotten very creative with creating spaces that are private, that are, you know, they're in one of the buildings, and maybe in this building as well, they have what they call phone booths, and it literally looks like a phone booth, but it just is a place you can go and get a little bit of privacy with a door that shuts. And there are office pods that are mobile, and so you can move them, you know, around a building. You could put them in any building that allows for those things. And so there's a lot of really cool ideas. Brian, if you want to add to that at all.
I'll bring.
Just really quickly, yeah, we have a lot of diverse spaces that we include. If anybody's interested, we can kind of sneak up to one or two of them after. Um, but it's the same problem almost applies to introverts as well. You know, introverts get a lot of fatigue from engaging with their colleagues, and we find that we've got to create these rooms for introverts as well. That's the other thing. So it's more, this variety of spaces that we need is more mainstream than, you know, just one particular group.
And then regarding the question about the hours, we do get requests for accommodations to restrict hours, and we can accommodate that. So if an employee is struggling and they say, geez, I can only work from 8 to 5, that's my limit, then they can request that as an accommodation, and we, you know, if it's a reasonable accommodation for their job, we can do that.
I'm Sarah Barron, and I'm from Ventures ATL in Atlanta. And I think that the major thing that accommodations boils down to is managing expectations. Managing expectations of the managers, the coworkers, and the employee. And I'm wondering, with the TV shows that we have out now, The Good Doctor, Atypical, Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, all of these shows that are out there and movies as well that are out there that give a certain perspective of what autism consists of. How do you manage expectations of the coworkers and managers in particular, and how do you integrate the employee to be a true member of the team?
So I actually talk about those shows in the training that I do, those exact shows. So Big Bang Theory, Atypical are not good representations of autistic people. And I say that because they aren't, and the coworkers should not expect to be working with those people. The Good Doctor, in my personal opinion, and in the opinion of many of my autistic colleagues online, is a decent representation of one autistic person. So is the Temple Grandin Academy Award-winning movie, right? That's one autistic person. So there are good and bad media portrayals that are realistic and not realistic. And we discuss that briefly. And then we talk about one autistic person is one autistic person.
In one of the trainings that we have, we talk about at a very high level that autism can be defined basically by 15, let's say, characteristics, right? Sensory integration, executive function skills, and so on and so forth. And I share with my colleagues that a lot of people are impacted by 3 or 4 areas, but not necessarily by absolutely everything, at least the people that come and apply for a job at SAP. So if you look at 3 or 4 of these characteristics and you look at the different combinations, you're going to have 1,400 different combinations. And I ask him, is it accurate or fair to categorize people in the spectrum as one single group, given these variations that we have? Of course, it's a rhetorical question, right? And then we go from there, and yes, we use some of those videos that there is a great movie. We don't use entire, segments, of course, but or entire movies. There's a movie called The Imitation Game.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
do you remember the lunch scene?
I talk about the lunch.
Okay, I talk about the lunch scene too, right? That is something that is a real work situation of one individual in the autism spectrum that has problems dealing with ambiguity, okay, and with lack of clarity in a specific scenario. So we rely on a lot of those because some of them do have great situations that we can share. The benefit that we have is that people have seen the movies, right? And they say, then they start connecting the dots, yeah?
Yeah, that's a great.
All right, Christy. Sorry, it helps to have friends.
Hi, Christy King with Comcast out of Philadelphia. We are in the midst of building a new Comcast Technology Center, open space, open floor plan, as many companies are as well. I'm interested, actually have a focus group next week in one of our mock-up centers with some employees from our employee resource group and those with disabilities to talk about what kind of accommodations we need to be thinking about in this open floor space. So my question is, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of accommodations? And I know you mentioned kind of the seating for this new open floor space, and what have you, if you all have had this situation, what have you already experienced already?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing is to make sure that there is some space that is away from the traffic. So, and we talked about it before, could you place that employee by a window so that they're not in the traffic flow of people walking by, having conversations, that kind of thing. We have things that are pretty helpful. We have what's called privacy screens. So even within an open office environment, they could put up a privacy screen around your desk so that you could get some privacy that way. And again, and you can see it in this building. There's a number of different spaces that we have available that people can go and have that quiet, private time with the door shut. And that's very important. And I think it's critical for a lot of employees. Again, this is not just employees with autism. It's all of our neurodiverse employees. Heck, I like to go to a private place sometimes and chill out. So, and the real estate and facilities team has just done a spectacular job of setting up really unique spaces that have a lot of different offerings. And employees seem to really like it, and they're using those spaces, and Brian wants to add something.
I'll just add 2 points. Your colleagues were out with us about a year ago. They toured some of our spaces. I can't remember the gentleman who came out, but secondly, the spaces are one thing, but what you've got to do is really create a culture in which it's okay for somebody to get up from their designated desk, for example, and disappear for an hour, and nobody's worried about where they are and if they're not working and so on. So yeah, it's the space and maybe even sometimes the technology to be able to work in that. So it's a combination of both. I just want to add that, sorry.
We noticed there's a Skype question. Can we please go to the Skype question? Okay. Jose's got another comment before we go to the Skype question.
Yes, just one quick comment. We have folks that are sensory seekers and sensory avoiders, okay? And when you talk about sensory seekers, I mean, there might be the person that wants to watch that video, exactly, looking at things, coming in, having 2, 3 screens at the same time, 2 books open at the same time. That's a work style, right? And there's going to be the sensory avoiders that are going to say, I don't want to be in the traffic. I don't want to be where there's people passing by. I don't want shadows, okay? And my only advice, Christy, is ask the colleagues what is it that works best for them, and if it doesn't work well the first time, try something else, okay? It's going to be a little bit of an iterative type of experience. having the good faith of going out and checking on people to see how they are doing and how the accommodation, that goes a long way for anybody, including people in the spectrum.
Well, I'm hearing one great strategy that they use here at Microsoft, which is built-in flexibility too. So, you know, as you're building for flexibility so that you can, you know, meet needs on the spot. Sounds
Absolutely.
like a really smart thing to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, we have a Skype question.
We certainly do. I apologize if I mispronounced this name. This question comes in from Ranga J. Araman from Expandability Goodwill San Jose. And the question is, have you had to deal with any meltdown or shutdown situations, and how?
Thanks. We have, and you know, it's not uncommon for employees that are in that situation where they're shutting down to just need to leave work, and that is okay, and that can come through as an accommodation as well. So, you know, I would just say those moments are going to happen. There's going to be times where employees are going to be stressed out and it's going to push them to their limit, and they might have a meltdown. You know, in those situations, our teams are they're very good at knowing exactly what to do, which is to pull in benefits to come help that employee, see what we can do to help. And they do that a lot. You know, along with that, though, I would just say that, you know, in terms of accommodations, there are things that come across that are pretty common. It could be things like working from home periodically. So maybe an employee, you know, you talked about working from home for a couple hours in the morning. I have an employee that works from home 3 days a week and comes into the office 2 days a week. And frankly, if she's not feeling so hot on those 2 days a week when she comes into the office, she stays home. And that's okay. Everyone knows about it. The expectation has been set, and she's still doing a great job. So with those accommodations, she's able to do her job. So again, we just try to be as flexible as we can.
And it's not only autistic people who melt down, just want to put that out there. But also having an accommodation of being able to leave a meeting if one is upset, I think is an important accommodation to avoid a meltdown. So just having that flexibility built in that you've been talking about.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's right on the money. And Ranga, thank you so much for your question. Always great to connect again. We've had situations where we have had an employee specifically in a meeting situation where there was a conversation taking place about a new deliverable taking place next week. Number one, everybody was talking at the same time, right? Number two, when they were making the tally of the activities that needed to be done, this person was interpreting that everything was kind of falling on his lap, okay? And that started increasing the level of anxiety and stress, and this person got up and stormed the room. Didn't leave the room, he stormed the room, which was different. So one of the things that we do is we talk to the team, okay, and educate people, right, and say, let's have a conversation about this. We have such a great manager. The manager, so what's the big deal? Okay, let's just learn, you know, from the experience, and whatever happened, let's try to work with our colleagues so it doesn't happen again. And our colleague on the other side, we talked on ways to address situation, the emotional regulation part of things. If you are going to have a situation like that, like you are sensing that you're feeling uncomfortable, it's perfectly okay to leave the situation in a professional way, okay? Honestly, there's been a solution for every situation that we've had. We have not had one single situation where we say, gee, this is completely out of proportion, right? Something that we found, that we mitigated, that we learned from, and most of the times it didn't happen again.
So it sounds like an attitude of flexibility and creativity, and being able to learn from experience goes a long way.
Absolutely. The other thing that is important is just the awareness training. When you do a good job with the awareness training, okay, a lot of these things are going to be more or less, you know, understood that you're able to mitigate them on the fly, yeah, with the right supports, of course.
Great.
With regards to meetings, we've had requests before where we know that there's going to be a meeting that might be a little bit upsetting to that employee. And so an example would be where a large reorganization was going to take place. And so that employee might be shuffled to some other team, or it might just be difficult for that employee to understand what's going on. And so we have had situations where the job coach will attend the meeting with the employee to help them interpret what's being said and really break it down for them in terms of what that means for them. So that's another good idea.
I have one more thing to say to me about meetings, with a nod to our friend from Skype over here. If meetings are too much of a sensory load or too hard to process for auditory reasons, Skyping into a meeting can also be an accommodation.
Great point. Other questions? Who's had their hand up longest? I think you have. Yes. Yes, you.
Hi, everyone. I'm the founder and CEO of Coding Autism. We're a online coding academy for autistic learners. A question that I had was, say if you are a company that doesn't necessarily have an Autism at Work program or a formal accommodation process, as an applicant, an autistic applicant, or as a career counselor, how do you pitch to employers and companies to include accommodations for autistic learners, and what are the resources that these companies can use, both from a government standpoint or Department of Rehab or anything that can help subsidize those costs? Because as an employer, there's obviously going to be a cost model behind providing these accommodations as well.
So you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there's a huge cost for accommodating autistic employees.
The job coach.
The job coach, which might be able to come through a social agency for a little while anyway. The Jobs Accommodation Network, JAN, has a good list of autistic accommodations.
I have much to add to that. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that the job coach is probably the best thing. Now, if I am an employee in the spectrum and I'm walking into an environment that has no experience with autism hiring, my personal preference, and that might not be the preference of everybody else, would be to share, that I need some accommodations, right? And they may look like this or like that. I may need a job coach. And just educating a little bit the employer that this is something, a service that you're going to be getting from vocational rehabilitation, would go a long way, in my opinion, right? I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that when people disclose, and maybe self-advocates think that way, that self-disclosure is a very, very powerful tool. I have a friend of ours, a friend of the program, that recently disclosed that he was in the spectrum seeking a job in a company that did not have a program. And 2 days later, he had an offer letter. And that's really making a lot of progress, in my opinion. When somebody goes out and self-identifies and shares, look, I do things this way, or I do this thing this way, can we do the interview again, or something to that effect, is huge. It's huge. Yes.
All right, yeah, we're going to have to wrap up. I'm afraid the next session is supposed to start in 4 minutes. I know we started late. So I apologize if we cut you short. If you have questions, I think all our panelists would be happy to be approached and talk to you one-on-one. So thanks, everybody.